Hi everybody, this is Kara with Self-Care Toolbox. Before I get started, I want to say if you like this video or if you've liked my videos before and visited me before, please like, comment, share, subscribe, all of the things. You can also follow me on Instagram or Facebook. You can also schedule a coaching session with me if that's something that you're interested in. Today, what I want to talk about is the neuroscience of how habits are formed. I have a playlist for neuroscience for beginners. So if you're interested in this stuff at all, the science of the brain, because I'm definitely connecting it to psychology and social work, whether I refer to neuroscience or not, it's always in the back of my brain. It's something that's sort of the framework for where I'm working from. So when we were born, we have trillions of neurons. Basically, neurons are cells in the brain, your brain cells, cellular structures. And so the synapses connect so they can receive messages from one neuron to another. And so you have all these different parts of the brain, and they all have a specific function. And as you grow older and as your tasks and your thinking become more complex, it's integrated where you can be using more than one part of the brain at a time than, say, a child would. So the way you would form a habit, the neuroscience behind it, is actually the same way that we learn anything. So the way that we learn things, like say you're driving somewhere and it's the first time you've ever been there and you're using the GPS and you're following it and you're making those turns, maybe depending on how far it is and depending on how familiar the area is, if you have to go back, it might take you a couple times driving somewhere before you go, oh yeah, it's that freeway or that freeway. Well, it's the same in the brain. So what happens is, whether we're talking about physically doing something, the habit of actually doing something, or just a habit, a habitual thought process, that is to say, thinking negatively or thinking positively, it all comes down to the wiring of the brain and neurons firing off and communicating from one to another, and the information travels from the nerve cells along what we call these superhighways in the brain connecting the neurons. So if you do something over and over, let's say you're learning a language. I love using the example of learning a language or playing an instrument, because you know how in life they say anything you do, practice makes perfect. Some people might be inherently more talented than others because there's a genetic factor as well. But in any case, regardless of whether you're born with natural talent or not, if you do something and you do it over and over and over and over again, most of the time we're going to get better at it, okay? So if you're learning a language and you're practicing certain phrases and words and you're going over and over and over, then eventually you start to recognize them. Eventually you can add on to it too. You're making sentences. Eventually it builds up so much that if you get to the point where you're in a country that speaks the other language, that you start thinking in that language. I actually had that experience in French. I studied French a little bit. I studied with a private tutor for a couple of years. My French is terrible because I don't practice very much. But there was a time when I was practicing a lot and I was gearing up to go on a trip to France, and I had met some people there the time before. And I said, next time I come, I'm going to speak your language. And then I took lessons and I learned a little bit. So I came back and I was ready to speak in broken French to them terribly with my American accent. But it was fun. But one thing that happened that I didn't expect is that I would see things like the advertisements on the walls in the subway and for movies and for whatever. And they were starting to make sense to me and I could actually understand them. So that was way cool because I got to experience a lot more of the culture than I knew. I may have gone a little off track, but I also play instruments, right? I play guitar and ukulele and keys. When I'm first starting to play, it's like you don't have any dexterity and you're like trying to play a simple chord, and it's frustrating and it hurts. And then eventually you get to a point where you can just transition from one chord to another without having to even think about it, and even while playing rhythm and maybe even singing. So that is all because as you're learning that, as you're doing it physically over and over again, the news of what you're supposed to be doing or whatever is traveling along the superhighway in your brain from one to another. And so those highways, I've seen a lot of graphic representations of this. The way it is explained in layman's terms is basically like it's being widened and being used more frequently. We say that we're strengthening those neuro connections. This is kind of a funny aside too, but I used to, in my prior life, I worked in a public works department managing construction projects and budgets and moving the engineers were project managers, but I was an analyst over all of the projects and making sure they were staying on time and da 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 da. And I got to learn how much it costs and how much time and how much money it costs to build a road, like rebuild a road. It's actually easier to maintain the road after it's new, to like every couple of years put another layer of like sealant or whatever, versus waiting 25 or 30 years to do anything. And then you have to like rebuild the whole thing, which kind of falls in line with when you're learning a language. Most people, a lot of people, including myself sometimes, will put it off. But even my French teacher used to say, 5 to 15 minutes a day is better than a couple hours spread out, like an hour Tuesday, an hour Thursday, like 5 or 10 minutes once a day is better. And so that's actually what is behind the design of the Duolingo app. If you want to learn a language, they're just endorsing that for you. But yeah, it's these very short lessons that you could just do pretty much anytime, whenever. So that's actually better. So it's keeping the practice in the brain, keeping those neural pathways like in use and strengthening them over time, even if it's like just a little bit. And so why I want to talk about this in terms of forming habits, or even in forms of forming negative or positive cognitive patterns, is because I believe, and there are studies that show, and I'll go into them in future videos, that things like practicing mindfulness, practicing gratitude, experiencing the 4 positive emotions. I'll make another video about the 4 positive emotions, but basically they're joy, contentment, interest, and love. Love is actually a combination of some of the other 3. When you think about forming a positive habit, how many times have you seen people say, do this for 21 days, or do this for 28 days, or 3 or 4 weeks, and it becomes a habit, or 30 days, da da da. Well, it's really not that simple necessarily, but there is some science, there's something to be said about that. Because it is forming a pattern. If you do something for a certain number of days, then eventually if you don't do it, your body, something innately feels like, ooh, I didn't do that thing today. That's happened to me with certain practices, such as working out, whatever, like writing. So that's true. The other thing about it that's equally true is having negative cognitive patterns or forming negative habits, such as not getting enough sleep repetitively, not getting enough sleep, not eating right, or just thinking negative things like I'm ugly, nobody loves me, nobody wants me, I have no life, like I'm a loser, or whatever kinds of negative stuff that can just like come through depending on who you are, or Murphy's Law, or like, of course this happened, bad things always happen, or waiting for the other shoe to drop because something good is happening, so something bad is bound to happen, or you can't trust people. So you see what I'm saying? So it's like, whether it's a negative thought or a negative habit, or a positive thought or a positive habit, or maybe something like neutral even. I can't really think of anything neutral right now, but I just wanted to say that there's a science behind the way that we think and the things that we do. And I think it's very important just to be aware of that, and to be aware of, actually I was just watching a talk the other day by Father Martin, who was a Catholic priest who did a lot of work to help alcoholics and drug addicts. And he went to so many meetings over the years that there's some very good speeches of him on YouTube. And so he did a speech on step 2. Step 2 is, came to believe in a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And he started talking about how it says sanity and not sobriety, and that the 12 steps, that's why they actually apply to so many other things, because it's really just whatever it is that you could be possibly doing that could be insane. They say the definition of insanity is doing something over and over again and expecting different results. So if you're doing something that could be self-destructive or counterproductive or self-defeating or self-sabotaging, whatever the case may be, whether it's bad for you physically, emotionally, or spiritually, you have to actually do something different. You have to break the pattern and form a new something, to make a change, a new habit. He said that sometimes he'll meet an alcoholic who had been in the program for a little while, but would just be like, my life isn't that different. I've been going to meetings. Like, I don't know why it's not different. And he would say, how long did it take you to become an alcoholic? It's same with like negative cognitions and stuff. Some of us, if you've experienced any type of abuse as a child, physical, sexual, whatever, or other things, negative things in your life, like some people are affected, their parents get divorced when they're young and it negatively affects them, and maybe they internally blame themselves. Like there's a million things. There's systemic things based on your race or social class that you can like internalize negative thinkings or feeling that you're less than. There's so many different ways, and also that our society and stuff, there's been studies that like we actually have more negative thoughts than positive thoughts. A lot of people do. At the same time, positive thoughts are more powerful than negative thoughts. So if you have one positive thought for every 3 negative thoughts, you're actually okay. They're powerful. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. If you're more interested in neuroscience, I'll be talking about it some more later, but you can check out my Neuroscience for Beginners playlist, and there's some awesome links to other profiles that speak directly to neuroscience. And also, if you just want to talk to me ever about grief or habit change or self-care or any changes you're trying to make in your life, whether it's based in your personal life or your career, or trying to change negative cognitive habits, or if you're grieving a loss, I'd really like to help you with any of that. Feel more than welcome to make an appointment with me, and or we could do a consultation or something like that. So thanks for watching. I hope this video was interesting and helped you in some way, and I'll talk to you more soon. Thanks.